There's a well-defined pecking order amongst performers. First, there's your basic unsigned indie band. They play a lot of clubs and parties and may have scraped together enough money to put out one or two records. Next are the groups who have a major label contract. Although most of the members have probably quit their day jobs, the truth is that they sell just enough records to stay afloat. The third level consists of genuinely successful groups, bands with gold and platinum albums. Their music careers have turned into well-paying jobs, with all the rights, privileges, and perks pertaining thereto. In the press and amongst fans, they are often referred to as stars, or maybe even superstars. In other words, these bands have made it. There is, however, another level beyond superstar. In the upper reaches of celebritydom, there are performers whose albums sell in the tens of millions. Not only are they rich beyond their wildest dreams, but everything they touch creates an enormous trickle-down effect. While many profit from the albums and concert tickets they sell, thousands, perhaps even tens of thousands, of ordinary, regular people benefit from the fallout of their investments in real estate and the stock market. These bands are so huge that national governments begin to depend on the tax revenue these groups generate in the economy. In fact, their profits may be so gigantic, they may have a measurable effect on the country's GDP. These bands are far beyond mere superstars. They are industries. U2 is such an industry. They've sold about 51 million albums in the US alone and somewhere around 170 million worldwide. Gross revenues have been tallied at anywhere from $1.5 to $1.7 billion. Estimates of the group's net worth range from anywhere from $600 to $900 million. U2's actions have even been known to affect the stock market price of their record label. Through their entertainment, real estate, and venture capitalist ventures, their organization provides employment for hundreds of people. But unlike your normal, run-of-the-mill, faceless multinational, U2 has a conscience. They're fiercely loyal to their hometown, reinvesting some of their enormous profits in various Dublin ventures, including the local art scene and the real estate scene. They contribute incredible amounts of time and money to charities, both big and small. They're politically active, railing against the injustices of governments and corporations and bad people. In fact, U2 has probably encouraged more people to think about political, social, and human rights issues than any other rock group on the planet. Underlying all this is the fact that U2 has accomplished everything with music. They've been very good at walking a series of fine lines. The line between good Christian values and bombastic preachiness. The line between constructive political dialogue and propaganda. The line between rock, punk, and Irish folk. The line between genuine passion and cartoonish buffoonery. And the line between being ultra superstars and four regular guys from Dublin. Commercially successful, critically acclaimed, and highly influential, U2 remains one of the most important groups in the history of all rock and roll. And all this began with a note on the bulletin board at Mount Temple Comprehensive School in Dublin in the fall of 1976. It was placed there by 15-year-old Larry Mullen. Having played drums since he was 9 in such prestigious outfits as the Post Office Workers Band, Larry was finally going to form his own rock group. He had already approached a student named Adam Clayton because Larry thought he was, cool looking. It also helped that Adam already owned a bass guitar. Several other people responded to the notice. Dick Evans came by with his little brother Dave, who brought a guitar that he had bought at a garage sale for £1. Peter Martin, one of Larry's friends, supplied a guitar and an amp. He was accompanied by guitarist Neil McCormick and an older, swaggering student named Paul Hewson. Although he owned a guitar and boasted he could play like a pro, he was actually quite inept. At that first rehearsal, everyone eventually told him to put the thing down. This, however, was when things started going right. Paul instinctively assumed command of the rehearsals, directing everyone else and somehow inspiring everybody to play better. As the band struggled through their favorite Stones and Bowie tunes, he started to sing with authority, bumping and grinding like some young Elvis. The others were impressed. Even without any formal vocal training, Paul's voice wasn't bad, and he had a commanding presence. When that first rehearsal was all over, a vote was taken. Paul could stay, providing that he took the job as singer, and if he promised to leave his guitar at home from then on. Out of the cacophony that reigned throughout those first rehearsals, the band found themselves a name: Feedback. Operating as a quartet, Paul, Larry, Adam, and Dave — Dick was unavailable at the time — Feedback made their first public appearance several weeks later, performing Peter Frampton's Show Me the Way as part of a 10-minute set during a talent contest at school. By the time the group played their second show at St. Fintan School, they performed as a quintet with both Evans brothers. And they had changed their name to The Hype. There were also two more name changes. As members of a quasi-gang known as The Village, perhaps best described as a street gang crossed with the Dead Poets Society and an escapist Gaelic study group, Paul and Dave had acquired new nicknames. Derek Rowan, Googie to the guys in The Village, was the person who christened Paul. While walking down O'Connell Street in Dublin, they came across a hearing aid shop across from the old Gresham Hotel. The store at 13 North Earl Street was called Bonavox Hearing Aids, and from that moment on, Googie declared that Paul would be forever known as Bono Vox, or alternatively Bono Vox, or just Bono for short. Meanwhile, because of the apparent angular shape of his skull, Bono renamed Dave Evans The Edge. The Hype rehearsed as often as they could over the next year, usually in the Mullins front room. When Adam was expelled from school, he threw all his energies into the band. He tried to learn all he could about equipment, sought advice on getting gigs, and generally tried to spread the word on his new group. Adam's work slowly began to pay off as word of the Hype spread. As far as anyone can remember, the Hype's first professional gig was played at a Dublin club called McGonagall's in early 1978. Opening for a band called Revolver, they spun through a short set that mainly featured Stranglers and Sex Pistols tunes. On March 17, 1978, the Hype performed in a talent contest in Limerick that was sponsored by a beer company. After making it through the early rounds, the group's final 3-song set won them the £500 first prize and an opportunity to record a demo for CBS Records. Although the session turned out poorly, CBS told them to come back and try again later in the year, the group was energized by the experience. Adam was especially jazzed and redoubled his efforts at making things happen. And Adam certainly wasn't shy. He was fearless on the phone, once ringing up Thin Lizzy's Phil Lynott for advice on how to choose a manager. On another occasion, he called Steve Averill, the singer of an Irish band called The Radiators, who just happened to be working at an ad agency by day. Talking about the importance of finding the right name for the band, Averill suggested that the Hype may wish to consider going with U2. It was short, it was snappy, and had a vaguely political ring to it. Shortly after the group returned from that show in Limerick, the Hype played a show at the Howth Community Centre. Midway through the show, Dick Evans bid everyone farewell. Then he walked off stage and out of the band forever. And at that moment, the Hype became U2. The next important step was to find a manager so that Adam could concentrate on making music with the rest of the group. His first attempt consisted of placing a fake ad in the classified sections of the NME, and it read, "Manager seeks the whereabouts of the Hype after an amazing gig. Please ring Brian. It was great, lads." Of course, it was no Brian. The phone number belonged to Adam. Didn't matter anyway because nobody called. The second attempt was much more successful. After badgering Hot Sounds writer Bill Graham, Adam was connected with his friend Paul McGuinness, a person with some experience in band management. Although he wasn't much into punk or new wave, Adam convinced McGuinness to check out U2 when they played the Project Art Center on May the 25th of 1978. After some initial reticence, McGuinness made the effort, and he was immediately impressed by what he saw. A young band of true friends, bound together by spirit, energy, and honesty. The singer, he thought, was especially charismatic. Musically, though, they still needed work. Nevertheless, McGuinness felt that with time and effort and guidance, their ambitiousness would overcome their technical deficiencies. As the group continued to play in front of ever larger crowds at schools and youth centers and pubs like the Beckett Inn and the Morin Hotel, he was proven correct. U2's first official release was U2 3, a 3-track record that was issued both as a 7-inch and a 12-inch by the Irish division of CBS Records in September 1978. Production was limited to about 1,000 individually numbered copies. Reaction was generally positive, especially to Out of Control, a song that Bono had written in honor of his 18th birthday. CBS also released a second Ireland-only single called Another Day in February of 1980. However, when it came to commit to underwriting a full album for the band, CBS decided to pass. And so did EMI. It wasn't until U2 played a show at Dublin National Stadium on February 16, 1980, that Island Records agreed to take something of a chance on the band. One of the key parts of the contract, a worldwide 4-year, 4-album deal, stated that U2 was to retain complete creative control over whatever they produced, right down to the finished artwork. Over the next 6 months, Island issued 3 U2 singles. There was 11 O'Clock Tick-Tock, which was actually a reworking of an older song called Silver Lining, and it came out in May of 1980. Then there was A Day Without Me, which came out that August, and then on October the 20th, 1980, the same day as the group's debut album, a song called I Will Follow was issued. Boy, which was the title of the album, did nothing for about 3 weeks. Doubts began to set in as U2 began to wonder if they had miscalculated their popularity. Paul McGuinness, however, was not to be denied. He booked the band on a quick tour of the UK, Europe, and North America, forcing U2 to take their music to the fans. Spurred by this tour, I Will Follow started appearing on the radio in Europe in November and December, and in North America in March of 1981. Once it began to get airplay, reaction was swift. Although the song contained just 2 chords, the sharpness of the guitar and the bashing of the drums made it stand out from the lightweight post-punk, new wave, insipid pop that was being heard at the turn of the decade. Those who heard it immediately realized that U2 was somehow different. They had a fresh approach to the standard guitar-based drums lineup. Some even suggested that they sounded like a more optimistic version of The Clash. The group spent 1981 playing in front of larger and larger crowds, as casual listeners were turned into fans by the group's seemingly inexhaustible passion and idealism. Plans were made to start work on a second album as soon as possible in order to capitalize on this wave of popularity. But then, disaster struck. This was after a gig at a club called Foghorn in Portland, Oregon, on March the 22nd, 1981. After the show, 3 young girls made it backstage to talk to the band. They hung out for about an hour and left. They also stole Bono's briefcase. Inside was $300 cash, some letters from his wife Allie, and all of Bono's lyrics for the next album. 12 months of inspiration and work walked out the door in that briefcase. Now this was a serious crisis. U2 was committed to going into the studio to record the next album in just 12 weeks. Bono was frantic. It had taken him 3 years to write all the lyrics for Boy, and he had a solid year's work just disappear. When they got back to London, producer Steve Lillywhite was sympathetic but firm. He said, "You can write a song in 5 minutes. Do your job." And so it came to pass that a confused, angry, and desperate Bono was forced to improvise many of the words to the new songs on the spot. One track was inspired by an album of Gregorian chants that Paul McGuinness always seemed to have on. With the help of his friend Jeremy and one of his old high school teachers, Bono worked out a few Latin phrases and hurriedly came up with the words to Gloria, the first big single from October. Once the album came out on October the 21st, U2 hit the road again for an extended tour. Audiences continued to get bigger as Bono became more and more impassioned with each passing performance. Word spread of this young Irish singer who would seemingly do anything to get the crowd going. Stage diving, climbing the PA stacks and lighting grid, running all over the stage and through the audience, whatever it took, his enthusiasm seemed boundless. The resulting feedback was good for the band, too. In fact, the third album was written during that 10-month road trip in 1982. It was called War, and it was issued on February 25th, 1983. It was a mature and confident record, full of political and social commentary. One of the big songs from the album was New Year's Day, which is probably the 6th or 7th song written for the project. Adam Clayton came up with the bass line during a sound check. It was then mated to a simple piano line that The Edge had invented in the studio. Once they had the basic structure of the song, it became Bono's job to come up with some appropriate lyrics. Now, try as he might, he had real problems crystallizing what he wanted to say. He had all these images in his head, but he couldn't find the words to describe them. After dozens of attempts at improvising the lyrics in the studio, U2 actually considered leaving the song off the album. But in the end, Bono decided to wing it one more time, treating it, believe it or not, as a love song to his wife. That seemed to work. Another strong track dealt with the events of Sunday, January the 30th of 1972. During a civil rights march in Londonderry, Northern Ireland, members of a British Army unit opened fire and killed 14 unarmed people. One of the enduring images of that day was a Catholic bishop waving a white handkerchief as a flag of surrender as he crawled towards the dead and the injured. When Bono wrote the words to Sunday Bloody Sunday, he made sure that he was very clear he wasn't offering support for either side. He just wanted to capture the feelings of young people in Ireland, how tired they were of the fighting and the dying. This began the tradition of Bono's waving of a big white flag during live performances of the song. This was not a flag of surrender. It was, however, meant to symbolize a clean slate, a flag free of the red, white, and blue of the Union Jack and the green, white, and orange of the Republic of Ireland. Thanks to songs like these, U2 finally had an album in the upper reaches of the North American charts. Believe it or not, neither Boy nor October had cracked the top 40 on the Billboard album charts. War, however, was the critical and commercial breakthrough that they needed. With the group's idealistic Christian values plainly in view, and with each concert a raw and exhilarating experience, U2 quickly became known as the band with a conscience. And by the end of the year, Rolling Stone magazine had started calling them one of the best bands on the planet. As U2 began to think about their fourth album, a realization began to set in. They knew that they had taken their original vision about as far as they could. If they were going to remain relevant in a changing world, they would have to change themselves. One of their main concerns was the fear that they were beginning to sound shrill and preachy as the Bono as God perception began to spiral out of control. Something had to be done if U2 expected to survive past the mid-1980s. After taking a little time off, Bono maintains that the group broke up and then formed another band using the same members and the same name. U2 decided to go with a new producer. After 3 albums with Steve Lillywhite, the band believed that it would be best if they found someone with a different perspective, a different vision on things. They chose Brian Eno, who then brought in Canadian Daniel Lanois for backup. Most of the early sessions were loose, casual affairs that took place in an old Irish castle using a mobile recording unit. Lanois was especially good with the rhythms, encouraging Larry and Adam to get a little funky from time to time. And then one day, as a joke, everyone decided to record some tracks in the nude. The only person who seemed to be struggling was Bono. As the basic tracks were coming together, he still didn't have all his lyrics written, and to make matters worse, he had less than 10 days to write and record his parts because the band was scheduled to go out on the road again. But, like always, he somehow managed to pull through. Eno brought an innovative structure to the recording process, encouraging the band to feel out ideas and then piece together the better bits later. Rolling miles and miles of tape as the band jammed and improvised, everyone reviewed the results later. A prime example of this approach is Pride in the Name of Love. It was based on a jam recovered from an old cassette tape made at a sound check in Hawaii on November 16, 1983. Once the guitar lick and the rhythms were reintroduced in the studio under Brian Eno's tutelage, the song fell together in about 15 minutes. It also became the band's first American top 40 hit, reaching number 33 in the winter of 1984. Within a few months, The Unforgettable Fire, which was released in September of 1984, was their best-selling album ever. Critics and fans pointed out how the album marked a creative rebirth for U2. Not only had their lyrical focus changed slightly, becoming less preachy and more spiritual, but working with Eno and Lanois had made them better musicians. It was a refined studio album, sonically honed in a way that many thought was beyond the group's abilities. But even as powerful as Fire was, it turned out to be something akin to a dress rehearsal for the group's next studio album. Following the release of The Unforgettable Fire, U2 spent much of the next 18 months doing what might be best described as community service. On May 17, 1986, U2 took part in the Self-Aid concert in Dublin. Impressed by the accomplishments of Live Aid in July of 1985, the group accepted an offer on the Conspiracy of Hope tour for Amnesty International before Bono left on a tour of the civil war zones in Nicaragua and El Salvador. Meanwhile, The Edge scored a film entitled Captive, which featured the first recorded vocal performances of an Irish teenager named Sinead O'Connor. Work on U2's fifth album began about 6 months after the final show on the Unforgettable Fire tour. At first, the group did nothing more than jam at Larry's house and sometimes at The Edge's home in Dublin. When Eno and Lanois were recalled for their production and engineering expertise in August of 1986, they brought along Flood, a young and promising English producer, to help with the recording process. Settling in at Windmill Lane Studios in Dublin, work began on approximately 30 new songs, many of which have been inspired by Bono's new appreciation of folk, American R&B, and roots music. With The Edge often working late into the night on his own, and with Eno forcing the band to extend themselves even further, the album began to coalesce in unexpected ways. One of the greatest stories from the sessions involves the legendary time when Eno, frustrated by the group's inability to make a particular song work, and angry that they were wasting so much time on it, apparently tried to erase the master tape, effectively killing the track. It was only after an assistant engineer in the studio blocked Eno from the tape machine with his body. Eno relented, and the band went back to work. The song, by the way, was Where the Streets Have No Name. The Joshua Tree was released worldwide on March 9, 1987. It was immediately heralded as one of the best albums of the decade. Prior to its release, there was little argument that U2 was one of the biggest bands in the world. The Joshua Tree confirmed that there was, indeed, none bigger. Entering the U.S. charts at number 7, it climbed to number 1 by the end of April, staying there for 9 weeks. It was the first album by any Irish band to reach number 1 in America. More than 300,000 copies were sold in Britain during the first week of its release, making it the fastest-selling album in history. It would remain on the British charts for 129 weeks. The Joshua Tree sold more than 10 million units in America and close to 25 million units worldwide. The album spawned several hit singles, including With or Without You and I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For. They were both number 1 hits around the globe. Not only did the album top the year-end critics and readers polls, U2 won Grammy Awards for Album of the Year and Best Rock Performance by a Group for With or Without You. The first tour through North America in support of the album was a virtual sellout, with 99.77% of all tickets sold through 29 dates. In Europe, 30 shows attracted 1.2 million people, which includes the 92,000 tickets that were sold in 1 hour for a show in Holland. On the American leg of the tour, the group was seen by more than 1.5 million people over 50 gigs, and the average gig attendance was 31,350. The total box office gross? More than 27 million. Then, after editing more than 160 miles of film that were shot during the tour by director Phil Journeau, Rattle and Hum, complete with a soundtrack filled with more new material, was released on October the 27th of 1988. The whole Joshua Tree tour went on forever. It began April 2nd, 1987 in Arizona, and didn't really come to an end until January 10th, 1990 in Rotterdam. In November 1990, more than 4 full years after they first started to work on the Joshua Tree, U2 began working on their next studio album in Berlin. They had picked a perfect time to be in the city. The wall was coming down, and the air was filled with hope and optimism. Maybe a little too much optimism. What began with high expectations nearly ended in disaster. The sessions were torn apart by creative divisions and personal tensions, which sometimes descended into ugly shouting matches between Bono and Lanois. No one could agree on what to do next. Nothing constructive was being written or recorded. And after 3 months' work, only 2 songs emerged. Everything else seemed to be nothing more than directionless crap. Brian Eno, who was eventually called in to clean house, was ruthless in his assessment of the group's work, throwing out any material that he thought to be substandard. He laid down some firm ground rules to bring some much-needed order to the sessions and basically whipped everybody back into shape. Moving everyone back to Ireland in March of 1991, things finally began to come together in some kind of calm and logical manner. On November 18th, 1991, U2 issued Achtung Baby, their first proper studio album since The Joshua Tree in 1987. For a project that initially deteriorated into chaos, Achtung Baby not only turned out to be a coherent album, but one that also demonstrated a serious sense of fun. What's more is that the album provided a series of sonic shocks, the industrial-ish clank of Zoo Station, the funky club beats of Mysterious Ways, the almost unbearable intimacy of One. It was another critical and commercial success, spawning 4 top 40 singles, and again selling more than 10 million copies worldwide. When U2 announced that they were about to head out on tour again, the demand for tickets outstripped the supply on a ratio of 10 to 1. Now, by any measure, the Zoo TV tour was massive. 157 shows between February 29, 1992 in Lakeland, Florida, and Tokyo, Japan, just before Christmas of 1993. With its elaborate stage setup and complex production requirements, it reigned as the most expensive concert tour spectacle in history. So expensive, in fact, that despite selling hundreds of thousands of tickets, it nearly bankrupted the band. During a 6-month break in the middle of the world tour, U2 used their pent-up energy to record yet another album. It really began when the Edge needed something to keep himself occupied following the breakup of his marriage. While the other 3 members were out having fun and relaxing, the Edge was content to fiddle about in the studio, recording demos as a way of working out his frustrations. One of the things he discovered was an old experimental jam from some long-forgotten Achtung Baby session. Messing with it for a while, he began to think that perhaps Bono could rap, some kind of vocal over the loop that he had created. However, Bono was nowhere to be seen, so the Edge decided to do the rap himself. When the rest of the band heard his deadpan delivery of a song he called Numb, things really began to roll. Before anyone realized what was going on, another complete album was in the can. It was called Zooropa and came out on July 6, 1993. It was a quirky, techno-tinged album that once again showed the world that U2 was still unafraid to take risks in order to remain relevant. The tours that encompassed the Achtung Baby and Zooropa periods were so long and so expensive that U2 needed another extended break in order to recharge themselves and their bank accounts. When everyone finally made it home in early 1994, it actually wasn't long before the group began to think about how they could reinvent themselves yet again. In 1995, they began to work on what they thought was going to be another U2 album. Instead, it turned out to be far too experimental for anyone's taste, including Larry Mullen, who hated the album. It was instead issued under the name The Passengers. The next proper, official U2 project was born out of the band's growing interest in techno, jungle, and various flavors of electronica. During this extended break in the middle 90s, each member of the band had independently discovered the sounds coming out of the UK club scene. Groups like Left Field and The Prodigy and Underworld became big favorites. This fascination with dance beats grew deeper after the group purchased a dance club in Dublin. DJs, spinning the latest dance tracks in U2's own club, exposed the band to new sounds and new attitudes. Although everyone was on side with this new direction, it became a battle to organize all the new ideas. And for the first time in more than a decade, Brian Eno wasn't involved, declining all invitations to participate. His place was taken by 2 dance specialists, Howie B. and Nellie Hooper. Under pressure by their fans and their record label to release something, U2 had to rush a little more than they would have liked. While they wouldn't admit it at the time, the album they called Pop was still a little less than what they wanted it to be when it was released on March 4th of 1997. Despite lackluster sales, the subsequent Pop Mart tour, an even more expensive and more elaborate outing than Zoo TV, was a major success, thanks in part to an innovative agreement with promoter Michael Cole. In exchange for booking the entire tour and for assuming all the financial risks involved, U2 was guaranteed a set fee, thereby avoiding the money pitfalls that threatened the band throughout the Zoo TV tour. After the tour and another break, the band was back in the studio by early 2000, once again working with Daniel Lanois and Brian Eno. The result was All That You Can't Leave Behind. It was released in October 2000. The album was considered a return to grace. Rolling Stone called it U2's third masterpiece, alongside the Joshua Tree and Achtung Baby. All That You Can't Leave Behind debuted at number 1 in 22 countries, and its worldwide hit single Beautiful Day earned 3 Grammy Awards. The album's other singles, Walk On, Elevation, and Stuck in a Moment You Can't Get Out of, were also award winners. The name of the tour in support of All That You Can't Leave Behind was called Elevation. It began with some warm-up shows in Paris, New York, and London in late 2000 and early 2001. It featured a big heart-shaped stage, the inside of which was reserved for the ultra-hardcore faithful. In the end, the tour grossed nearly $150 million, and total grosses for the year, album sales, ticket sales, t-shirt sales, and everything else, were in the $320 million range. Following the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks, the album gained resonance. The band's next studio album was called How to Dismantle an Atomic Bomb. It came out on November 22, 2004. Sonically, the band was looking for a harder-hitting rock album than All That You Can't Leave Behind, and they had found that sound. The first single, Vertigo, was featured on a widely aired television commercial for the Apple iPod in conjunction with the release of a special edition U2 iPod and an iTunes U2 box set. The album debuted at number 1 in 32 countries. First week sales in the U.S. doubled that of All That You Can't Leave Behind and set a record for the band. To support the album, the band went on the Vertigo Tour. Using a similar setup and stage design as the previous tour, the Vertigo Tour featured a set list that included songs not played since the early 1980s. And much like the Elevation Tour, the Vertigo Tour was a large commercial success. The album and its singles won Grammy Awards in all 8 categories in which they were nominated. And just to put a period on everything, Bruce Springsteen inducted U2 into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2005. So, what does the future hold for U2? Well, as of early 2008, they were working with Brian Eno and Daniel Lanois on yet another album. The bottom line is that more than 30 years after that first rehearsal in Larry Mullen's kitchen, U2 has no intentions of slowing down and no intentions of going away. The first thing that newcomers notice is, of course, the hair. It is, after all, one of the most famous haircuts in all of music. But even so, Robert Smith may appear a most unlikely candidate for superstardom. In fact, a 1993 cover story on The Cure in Q magazine ran with this headline over top of one of Robert's pictures: "How did this get to be a superstar?" Now, outward appearances aside, this much is undisputed. Robert Smith has steered the career of The Cure for better than 3 decades, creating one of the world's most successful doom and gloom outfits. As a result of Smith's unrelenting, eclectic, and highly romanticized vision of what The Cure should be, the band has sold more than 25 million albums. And despite the occasional protestation from Smith, "We are not goths," he'll say that a lot, the band has had a lasting effect on alt-rock, especially with the black-clad eyeliner and lipstick crowd, including a significant portion of, yes, the goth community. With songs that often obsessed on mournful things, The Cure found an audience desperate for a way to express their feelings of futility, purposelessness, and alienation. In The Cure, and specifically Robert Smith, they found someone who could express those feelings, validating the way they looked at the world and thereby offering some measure of comfort. As they say, misery loves company. While it's true that The Cure is known mostly for gloomy and sometimes morbid songs that focus on the absurdities of the universe, they've been called the messiahs of melancholy, among other things, Smith has been known to write some pretty dandy pop songs, all featuring thin, tinny guitars, synth pop embellishments, and of course, his trademark quirky vocal style. This combination of light and dark has made The Cure one of the most influential bands in the post-punk world. The Cure begins and will ultimately end with Robert Smith. The earliest roots of the band can be traced back to Christmas Day 1972, when Robert found his first guitar under the tree. Within a couple of years, and having learned a few basic chords from his older brother Richard, he was writing songs with Lawrence Lull Tulhurst, a friend he had met on a school bus back in 1964. As a particularly precocious child, Robert did not respond well to authority, nor did he have any intentions of fitting in with the other kids. A prime example might be the time that Robert wore a black velvet dress to school on a dare. He was then promptly beaten up by 4 classmates. Music soon became a way to avoid school. When he was 14, Robert formed his first band. They were called the Crawley Goat Band. He did this with his brother Richard, his sister Janet, and a few friends from the neighborhood. This was followed by an outfit simply known as The Group, because, well, they were the only rock band at school, so a name really wasn't necessary. Starting in January 1976, a series of groups came and went. The Obelisks, Malice, and finally, The Easy Cure. This takes us to about January of 1977. This was an incarnation that took their name from a song that Lol had written. Meanwhile, Robert found himself expelled from school for being a rather malignant influence on the other children. Much of his newfound free time was spent brewing his own beer at home. During this year-long metamorphosis, a parade of would-be pop stars came and went. Brother Richard and sister Janet, Alan Hill, the Sicano brothers, a drummer named Graham. But by January of 1977, things had settled down somewhat. This new lineup featured Robert, Lol, a former waiter at Gatwick Airport named Porl Thompson, and a singer named Peter O'Toole. Inspired by the growing punk movement, the Easy Cure entered and won a songwriting contest sponsored by Areola Hansa in the summer of 1977. But then things became complicated when singer Peter O'Toole quit to work in a kibbutz in Israel. With more gigs and some demo sessions coming up, decisive action was needed. From the beginning, Robert had been the undisputed leader of the group, directing rehearsals, defining musical direction, and writing the majority of original material. Once O'Toole left, Robert decided that if things were going to proceed the way he intended, then he would have to assume the job as lead vocalist. It was a simple case of, if you want to do something right, then do it yourself. Another crisis soon appeared. Following months of work with Hansa, the label that had given them the prize in the songwriting contest, the Easy Cure discovered that the label had plans to manipulate their image into something less threatening and more radio-friendly. This appalled Robert Smith. Refusing to be remade into something that they weren't, the group and Hansa parted company. There were 2 more changes in the spring of 1978. The first came when guitarist Porl Thompson decided to quit, and the second was when the band's name was simplified to just The Cure. This would be in May of 1978. Now working as a trio, Smith, Tolhurst, and a guy named Michael Dempsey, The Cure recorded a 4-song demo on May 27, 1978, and circulated the results amongst a number of different record companies. After some discussion, the group became the first signing of Fiction, a new label set up by Polydor A&R man Chris Perry. Within 6 months, a recording of Killing an Arab, the band's first single, officially released on December 22, 1978, was being played on The John Peel Show on the BBC. Killing an Arab certainly stood out as a single in the winter of 1978 and 1979. Not only did it have a decidedly quirky feel, but the subject matter proved to be a little more touchy than the Cure had anticipated. Smith had written the song after reading the book L'Étranger by Nobel Prize-winning author Albert Camus. But many people saw the song as a simple case of Arab bashing. Still gripped by the impact of the oil embargo of the early 1970s, and alarmed by sheiks buying up swaths of British real estate with their buckets of petrodollars, Arab xenophobia was still running very high. So no wonder Killing an Arab was misconstrued as racist hate propaganda. Various Arab groups claimed to have been defamed. Meanwhile, scuffles began to break out whenever the Cure played the song live, thanks mainly to intrusions by members of the ultra-right National Front. Naturally, the track was banned by the BBC. The outcry was so fierce that Fiction deleted the single just 10 weeks after it was released. Undeterred, the band began to work on their debut album and released 3 Imaginary Boys on May 5th of 1979. Despite the fact that the group was initially disappointed with the production, most critics seemed to appreciate the Cure's thin, minimalist sound, which stood in sharp contrast to the noise of punk and the pop of new wave. The first single, Boys Don't Cry, featured what would soon become known as Robert's trademark economical guitar stylings. It also received good reviews, but surprisingly, didn't even crack the top 100 on the British charts. By the summer of '79, Robert Smith was beginning to demonstrate a strong penchant for makeup and outrageously teased jet black hair. This, perhaps more than anything, attracted the attention of Steve Severn of Siouxsie and the Banshees, who offered Robert a part-time job as the Banshees guitarist. Two Banshees had suddenly quit, which had left the band in the lurch. Robert accepted, and he played in both bands for the duration of a British tour. Once things wrapped up in November, Robert had to face another lineup change, this time in his own band. Michael Dempsey had quit, saying that he felt uncomfortable in the background and wasn't allowed as much input into The Cure as he would have liked. Once he left to join a band called The Associates, he was replaced by Simon Gallup, an old friend from a Surrey band called Lockjaw. In addition to Gallup, Smith hired Matthew Hartley, an ex-hairdresser and keyboard player from a group called the Magpies. This new lineup made its debut at Eric's in Liverpool on November the 16th of 1979. After spending a few weeks in the studio in the spring, the group's second album, 17 Seconds, was released. This was April 26, 1980. It eventually peaked at number 20 on the UK charts. The extracted single, A Forest, which came out in March, crept up to number 31. More touring followed. There was Europe, there was North America, New Zealand, Australia, after which Matthew Hartley quit, reducing the group to a trio once again. There was Smith, there was Tolhurst, and Simon Gallup. The Cure's grueling pace continued through the fall and winter of 1980. In the space of just a couple of months, there were rehearsals for the third album, a round of recording demos, which were ultimately scrapped, a virtually sold-out trip through Scandinavia, followed by another spin through the UK. By February of 1981, The Cure was back in the studio, working on what would become known as an album called Faith. Released on April the 11th of 1981 and preceded by a single called Primary, Faith was, by the band's own admission, a rather morbid-sounding album. Described by critics as grammar school angst, that came courtesy of the NME, the doom-laden, self-loathing, semi-religious themes of Faith were the group's first real foray into a sound that made them a favorite of alienated teens everywhere. Robert Smith was cast as a somber soul, someone who ranked right up there with Ian Curtis of Joy Division as one of the most depressed musicians on the planet. Now, there were valid reasons for the band's dark mood, not least of which was the terminal illness of Lawl's mother and the death of Robert's grandmother. These personal tragedies led to a lengthy period of doubt, anger, and reevaluation. There was, however, a large market for this kind of material. Faith debuted at number 14 in the UK. The descent into bleak darkness continued on Pornography, The Cure's fourth album, which came out on April the 18th of 1982. Although the album received mixed reviews from the critics, the album did finally give the group their top 10 breakthrough. It debuted at number 8. And to their growing mob of black-clad, made-up, angst-ridden fans, the album clearly and effectively articulated their feelings of isolation and alienation. The situation within the band, however, was as bleak as the music. In mid-81, Smith had hinted that The Cure was on the verge of splitting up, having failed to attract the same kind of respect and following as Joy Division. The gloom extended it into the next tour, where everyone came to blows after a show in Strasbourg, France in May. Smith and Gallup both quit the band for a week after that, and the whole thing resulted in Gallup's total departure from the band in June. On the insistence of label head and producer Chris Perry, Smith and Tolhurst, now playing keyboards with the help of a session drummer named Steve Goulding, returned to the studio to record a single to demonstrate to their fans that the group was still together. Smith, however, was disappointed with the results. He said it was too contrived, and at first he wanted the song Let's Go to Bed released under the name of Recur. When convinced that it was indeed worthy of the Cure name, the single eventually peaked at number 44. But still confused and angry about his musical future, Smith went off to rejoin Siouxsie and the Banshees for a short tour. For the time being, The Cure ceased to exist. Now, it's quite possible that the band's story might have ended there had it not been for a last-minute invitation by the BBC to perform on a show called the Oxford Roadshow. For whatever reason, Robert Smith had a change of heart, and he quickly enlisted Tolhurst and hired drummer Andy Anderson and bassist Derek Thompson. The performance went so well that Smith decided to give The Cure another shot. After hiring Anderson and bassist engineer and producer Phil Thornley, a new single called The Walk was in the stores by the summer. By the following January, The Cure had released The Love Cats, which hit number 7 on the UK charts. There was also a compilation of early material called Boys Don't Cry, and a mini-album entitled Japanese Whispers, which came out in December of 1983. Following the release of a dour and inconsistent album called The Top in May of 1984, The balance of the year was spent on the road, culminating with a bizarre incident in the Far East in September when an Andy Anderson drinking binge led to a physical attack on the rest of the band. Using Vince Eli, the original drummer from the Psychedelic Furs, as an emergency replacement for 11 dates, the band then hired Boris Williams in order to complete the tour. And if all that weren't enough, bassist Phil Thornley quit in December, leading to a forced reconciliation with Simon Gallup in January of 1985. After the darkness and uncertainty of 83 and 84, the next 3 years were a welcome relief. Not only did The Cure release 3 of their best singles and videos in 1985 in the form of In Between Days, Close to Me, and an updated version of Boys Don't Cry, they also had a decent hit with The Head on the Door, which was released in August of 1985. But the best was yet to come. In 1986, The Cure struck pay dirt with a greatest hits collection entitled Standing on a Beach. Quick tangent here, this can be a little confusing. The vinyl edition of this release was entitled Standing on a Beach. The CD and cassette versions, featuring many B-sides not included on the vinyl release, were issued under the title Staring at the Sea, but it's essentially the same thing. The album reached number 4 in the UK, and a then impressive number 48 in America, selling several million albums in the process. A 1987 double set entitled Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, which came out in May of 1987, featured a series of impressive singles, including an American top 40 hit with Feels Like Heaven, which led the band to playing some of their largest concert crowds ever. The Cure had reached a new commercial peak. Standing on a Beach and Kiss Me sold a combined 6 million copies worldwide. Even the group's lineup enjoyed a period of unprecedented stability. There was Smith and Tolhurst and Gallup and Williams and Paul Thompson, along with touring help coming from Furs keyboardist Roger O'Donnell. Robert even found time to settle into domestic bliss with his longtime sweetheart, Mary Poole. But naturally, it couldn't last. In December 1988, Smith reassembled The Cure in a form that did not include Lowell Tolhurst. By February of 1989, Tolhurst had been officially fired under the auspices that he was no longer making any significant contributions to the group. Now, Tolhurst later sued The Cure, specifically Robert Smith and Fiction head Chris Perry, for a greater share of the band's royalties. The case finally went to trial in February of 1994, and on September 16th of that year, the judge threw out all the charges, leaving Tolhurst with a legal bill of more than £1 million. In court, Smith described his former best friend as a tired, shambling shadow of his former self. He also made no efforts whatsoever to defend Lowell's often ridiculed simplistic keyboard style. In fact, Robert described Tolhurst's non-contributions to the band by saying that his role was almost that of a court jester. The first album of the post-Tolhurst era was, much to Lowell's chagrin, Disintegration. Released on April the 28th of 1989, less than a week after Robert's much-anticipated, much-dreaded 30th birthday, the album was a solid collection of songs that finally displayed The Cure's long-held potential for creating mope rock for arenas and stadiums. Often foreboding and occasionally downright icy, the album contained no fewer than 4 essential songs from the Cure catalog. There was Lullaby, Pictures of You, Love Song, and Fascination Street. This propelled it into becoming the best-selling release of the band's career. Disintegration was The Cure's long-awaited commercial breakthrough, peaking at number 3 in the UK and at a strong number 12 on the Billboard charts in America. The following Prayer Tour played to large crowds all over the world. Some audiences were so appreciative that the band often played beyond the curfews imposed by the venues. Even though this meant that The Cure had to pay thousands of dollars in fines for going overtime, Smith was only too happy to keep playing in order to keep the fans happy. However, as good as fortunes were, The Cure's lineup was still in a state of continuous flux. After appearing at the 1990 Glastonbury Festival on June the 24th, Roger O'Donnell quit and was replaced by one-time Cure roadie Perry Beaumonte. Following a much-needed 6-month break, The Cure returned with Mixed Up in November of 1990. This was a greatest hits sort of album, featuring remixes of 10 favorites from the group's career. Designed mainly as a present for hardcore Cure fans, many of the new mixes were far too radical for general consumption, the album was launched in a rather unique way. For as long as he can remember, Robert Smith has held a certain fascination with radio and broadcasting. When Mixed Up was about to be released, Smith paid to set up a pirate radio station at a secret location in downtown London. For 4 hours on the night of September the 1st of 1990, Smith went on the air, playing tracks from the new CD as well as interview clips, live recordings, bootlegs, commercials, and even weather and traffic reports. Although the album initially received a critical hammering, a remix album was considered pretty pretentious in 1990, it started a trend, and soon other artists were issuing remix albums of their own. When The Cure got around to issuing Wish on April the 21st of 1992, it had been 3 years since the band had released a proper studio album. On the surface, the album was positively, jolly in places. I mean, you can check out songs like Friday I'm in Love. But below the surface, the much-loved Cure angst was very much intact. Songs like Open and High. Fans responded in droves. Wish debuted in America at number 2. The group's 39-date North American tour sold out in virtually every city, while trips through Australia and Europe saw box office grosses approach $1 million each. Once things died down, it was time for another long break. Smith spent the latter half of 1993 and most of 1994 fighting that court case against Lol Tolhurst. He also spent time supervising the release of 2 distinctly different live albums. There was Show, which came out on September the 21st of 1993, featured newer, pop-oriented material, while Paris, which came out on October the 26th, concentrated on the songs that made the Cure cult favorites. Naturally, there was the almost predictable, and by now inevitable, lineup change. Because he was a huge Led Zeppelin fan, no one was surprised when poor old Thompson accepted a chance to play in the backup band that supported Jimmy Page and Robert Plant on the reunion tour. Roger O'Donnell returned on keyboards, prompting Perry Bamante to switch to guitars. Then, just as the band was about to record a follow-up to Wish, the drummer quit. After placing ads in the British music papers, Jason Cooper won the job. Finally, after a wait lasting 4 years, The Cure released their 10th proper studio album. They called it Wild Mood Swings, and it appeared on May 7, 1996. It was a departure from the pop stylings of Wish, returning the band to somewhat darker and occasionally edgier territory. The title was almost apt, considering how the sound and feel of the album veer between light pop and heavy dirges, not to mention strange detours such as the mariachi horns that graced a song called The 13th. The Grammy-nominated album Blood Flowers was released in 2000, after being delayed since 1998. This album was, according to Smith, the third of a trilogy that went along with Pornography and Disintegration. The band also embarked on the 9-month Dream Tour, which was attended by more than 1 million people worldwide. In 2001, The Cure left Fiction, the label that had been their home since the late 70s, and they released their Greatest Hits album and a DVD, which featured the music videos for a number of classic Cure songs. The band headlined 12 major music festivals that year, in addition to playing several 3-hour concerts during which they performed the albums Pornography, Disintegration, and Blood Flowers in their entireties on back-to-back nights at the Tempodrome in Berlin. These performances were released on DVD as The Cure Trilogy in 2003. In 2004, a new 4-disc box set came out on Fiction Records entitled Join the Dots, B-Sides and Rarities 1978 to 2001. The set included 70 Cure songs, some previously unreleased, and a 76-page full-color booklet of photographs and history and quotes, packaged in hardcover. For a box set, it did quite well. It peaked at number 106 on the Billboard 200 album charts. The band released their 12th album, The Cure, on Geffen Records in 2004, which was produced by nu metal guru and longtime fan Ross Robinson. They made a top 10 debut on both sides of the Atlantic in July of 2004, and debuted in the top 30 in Australia. To promote this album, the band headlined the Coachella Music Festival in California. The band was awarded the MTV Icon Award for 2004. Then, in May of 2005, Roger O'Donnell and Perry Bamante left the band. It was announced in June that Paul Thompson would be returning for the band's 2005 summer shows, including their set at Live 8 in Paris on July 2nd. Later that year, the band recorded a cover of John Lennon's Love for Amnesty International's charity album Make Some Noise. In 2006, The Cure appeared at the Royal Albert Hall on behalf of the Teenage Cancer Trust. It was their only show through the end of the year. Despite many rumors that The Cure would break up or that Robert Smith would dissolve the group and record under his own name, it never really happened. The Cure kept on releasing material. At the moment, in his 4th decade in the music industry, Robert Smith doesn't seem to be in any kind of hurry to retire. When he's not writing or recording or touring, Robert Smith leads what amounts to a fairly quiet and, some would say, boring life. Together with his wife Mary, he lives in a large house on the southern coast of England, where his favorite pastimes remain soccer and nipping down to the local pub for a few pints. Although he generally enjoys his position as a senior member of alt-rock's aristocracy, Robert Smith says he still has moments of melancholy and can slip quite unexpectedly into doleful moods. He insists that 90% of the time he's completely normal and emotionally well-balanced. The only way he says he can shake it is to express it through music, which is good, because as long as he's able to dwell on the purposelessness and futility of humankind's existence, there will be plenty of material for Cure albums.